The problem with the existing independent commission created by the President, it doesn't have enough teeth. At least it's independent of Congress, pero kulang pa rin sa power. Madaling gumawa ng kwento. At kung salita lang yung pinagbabasehan natin, anyone could make up a good story. The question is, can that story be independently verified? In a legislative inquiry, it's very hard to say what the overall objective is, because every single congressperson who asks a question has or may have their own agenda role. Because under the law, Republic Act 1379, when there's evidence of ill-gotten wealth, it's the sole gen who must file a petition. All they need to prove is preponderance of evidence, not reasonable doubt, and the court can already order that ill-gotten wealth be returned to the government. Sa tingin ko ngayon, at dahil lalong-lalo na ang daming nananawagan na magkaroon ng pananagutan, yan ang dapat unahin ng ating pamahalaan. Get that money back. The criminal cases will take time because you have to develop a lot of evidence. Para sa akin, accountability really should have no political color. Everyone who's responsible for stealing billions of pesos must be punished.
Hello, Congressman Shell, at last. Anong pakiramdam mo that it's your first time in Congress as an elected official? And I'm sure you didn't see this scandal coming, and what a scandal it is. How do you feel now about being a member of Congress, the Congress that's now viewed as probably the worst in terms of corruption history?
Well, it's really something new to me. You know, sanay ako sa courtroom. I'm used to the classroom as well. But being in session, in committee meetings and plenary is totally new. But at the same time, it's a very big challenge for me.
Okay, but sabi mo nga, ang tagal mo na nag-prosecute ng ganito or naglilitigate ng ganito, no? Pero anong kakaibahan ng being a lawyer in court, producing evidence and proving guilt or innocence, and being a congressman in a committee hearing, questioning people who the public has already judged, pretty much?
Well, the rules are different in the first place. In court, there are very strict requirements for questioning witnesses. And that's why in committee hearing, you have much more leeway. Yeah. Sometimes it allows grandstanding, which you can't really do in court. But at the same time, you have the freedom to really hone in on certain topics and get the answer that you believe you should deserve from the witnesses. I enjoy the freedom that I don't have in court, which I have in the committee hearings to ask questions. At the same time, the basic art of questioning is still the same, whether you're in court or in a committee hearing. You have to be able to listen very well to the answer and craft questions that are nuanced depending on how the body language and the what comes out of the mouth of the witness, how that comes out.
Yeah, well, okay, so there's so much leeway for you to ask questions, no? Mas madaling magtanong ng kung ano-ano, which is what so many other lawmakers do, no? Kung ano-anong tinatanong na wala namang kinalaman talaga. Pero ganun din yung mga sumasagot, no? Yung mga dinidinig. Kung ano-ano ring sinasabi, at kung ano-ano ring hindi sinasabi na halata namang yun na nga yung sagot. Anong pakiramdam nun? And how do you make it, paano mo sila nahuhuli? Kumbaga, if there's such a thing as, trying to get that gotcha moment.
I think it's understanding human psychology. my practice in court has been so extensive that I've had really a lot of opportunities to question witnesses. So medyo ramdam ko na kung if I ask certain questions, I know they're going to deny. And so I work around that and find ways to still make sure the truth comes out, even despite their denials.
Okay, ang comment ng marami dyan sa mga hearing ay very simple, no? Ang dali niyong magtanong sa mga contractor, sa mga hindi congressman. Pero yung kapwa ninyo congressman, hindi niyo naman na ipapatawag doon at hindi niyo maitanong all in the name of parliamentary courtesy. How does this make you feel?
You know, that's one of the problems and the shortcomings of a congressional inquiry when there are people involved who are members of Congress. That's inherent in any kind of investigation by a legislative department. And that's why one of the things that we have been calling for a long time is for Congress to create an independent commission to look into not just the flood control but all infra projects. Kasi ang sabi nga, di ba, nakuha natin, tip of the iceberg lang yung flood control na yan. There are issues, I understand, with roads, farm-to-market roads, issues with classrooms, and so, hospitals, ang dami na dapat din tingnan. The problem with the existing independent commission created by the President, it doesn't have enough teeth. At least it's independent of Congress, pero kulang pa rin sa power. We were hoping that we could get this law passed, but until now, the bill we filed is still just there, pending.
Oh, okay, so siguro maganda na rin talakayin na ano ba ang kahinaan nitong ICI? Sa totoo lang, yung mga nakakaintindi, alam na toothless sila, no? Wala naman talaga magawa lang sa subpoena powers, pwede silang i-refuse, no? At dahil wala nga silang subpoena powers, parang wala rin sila talagang authority to hold someone in contempt. Technically, no? Walang magawa. Ano pa ang mga dapat ibigay sa isang independent commission kung gagawing mang legal commission yan talaga?
Well, you mentioned the two most important, the power of contempt and the power to subpoena and compel production of evidence. But aside from that, when you have an investigation involving billions of pesos of taxpayers' money, you have to have a mechanism to provide protection to witnesses and also to even provide immunity if they blow the whistle. At yun din yung balak namin when we filed our House Bill 4453. We gave it a time limit, a 2-year period, subject to extension, that basically just 2 years to do everything they must do. We gave it a mandate to look into not just flood control, but all forms of infrastructure projects that may involve corruption. Okay. And we gave it the power of contempt, subpoena power, and the power to coordinate for purposes of witness protection and immunity.
Naku, pag-usapan natin yung witness protection na yan, napaka-controversial, no? Especially in this flood control scandal. Sino ba ang dapat bigyan? Alam nating lahat yung least guilty, pero hindi na natin malaman at this point, sino ba yung least guilty? Ang lalaki ng mga nanakaw ng mga tao. For example, sila Bryce ba yan? Least guilty ba yung mga yan? Sila Alcantara, least guilty ba yung mga yan? Yung mga Diskaya, so contractor lang naman daw sila na kinonsider pa maging state witness. Paano bang maging whistleblower or state witness na talagang protektado tsaka nararapat na walang ninakaw or kung magbabalik man, talagang sapat lang?
Well, first of all, they have to assess, the government will have to assess, ito bang witness na ito nagsasabi ng buong katotohanan? Kasi kung magiging selective lang siya, hindi natin makukuha yung kailangan makuha para mapatunayan kung sino talaga yung may accountability. Second, if I remember my procedure right, the requirement is not the most guilty. So yung pwedeng bigyan halimbawa...
hindi least guilty.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a difference, no?
Yes.
Kasi pag least guilty, how is that different from not the most guilty? Ang dami nun, bale, kung not the most guilty.
Maraming degrees kasi yung in participation sa isang criminal activity eh. Pwede halimbawa, kumbaga, look out ka lang. Pwedeng ikaw mismo yung directly involved. Pwedeng ikaw yung nag-utos, ikaw yung mastermind. And in a case like we have here involving so much money, to me, the most guilty are the people who crafted, designed, and put this whole operation into play. Those who were involved na bagman sila, ganon, I don't think we would consider them the most guilty.
Okay.
And therefore, they would be qualified to be discharged as a state witness if the other conditions were met as well.
Okay, ang ganda niyan, ang ganda niyan. Kasi medyo meron na tayong mga detalye. I mean, based on what we've known, what has been published, for example, what we know now, at least as far as Marites talk is concerned, ay ang mastermind ay goes all the way up to, wag na lang natin muna i-include ang presidente, pero kay Speaker Martin Romualdez. And of course, Zaldico, the bagman of Martin, at nakinabang din dahil chair siya ng appropriations. So yung mga yon, out na yon, syempre, sabihin na natin na hindi sila yung not the most guilty, hindi sila yon. No? Kasi siguro sila yung most guilty dito. Pero below them, ang daming nakinabang. You have the Alcantaras and the Bryces and the JPs na naglaunder ng bilyon-bilyong piso sa casino. Yung mga ganun ba, not the most guilty?
I think they would qualify provided that the other conditions are also met.
Like?
For example, hindi sila convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude. And there are a few other requirements. But the most important thing that the government must assess is, are they going to hold things back? Because what you require from a witness who's part of the conspiracy or part of the circle is someone who will really divulge everything. And yun yung kailangan gawin halimbawa ng ombudsman o ng Secretary of Justice pag-assess niya ng pagbibigay ng immunity or witness protection. Because you want full cooperation from all the witnesses. Hindi, kung magiging selective kasi sila, may sarili agenda yan. And ang may susulong, hindi yung katotohanan, kundi yung kanilang agenda.
Paano na-assess kung talagang they're not going to withhold anything out? How do you get around that? How do you know that sila Bryce are not protecting other names?
You look for corroboration where it can be found. You don't take them at face value for what comes out of their mouth, but you check that what they're saying can be independently verified. Not everything, because you really won't be able to verify everything,
Yes.
but at least the material points of their testimony.
Oo.
Malaking bagay kasi yun. Ang dali kasi, in my experience, having been practicing for so long, madaling gumawa ng kwento. At kung salita lang yung pinagbabasihan natin, anyone could make up a good story. The question is, can that story be independently verified? It's very much like journalists also do when they check sources.
Two independent sources at least, no? May corroboration. But in this case nga, yung kunyari, Alcantara, Bryce, JP, they work on certain similar projects, no? Parang, you would not call them independent, would you? Kasi parang magkaka-collaborator sila, kumbaga, sa mga project, right?
They wouldn't be independent. Now, could you find ways to check if their story is true? Yes, you can. For example, if they claim that I was in a meeting with a certain person on a certain date and time, that can actually be verified by technology because we all have cell phones. Those cell phones have geographic locators which can be accessed through the telcos. Pwedeng i-check yon. If they had conversations that they claim were made electronically, that can be checked. If they had transactions that went through some kind of, bank or other kinds of transactions, mache-check din yon. So it's not just listening to the story and saying that it sounds credible. It requires really finding ways to verify their story.
Kaya pala pag nagka-question ka, palagi mong tinatanong, are you willing to turn in your cell phones and the contents of your texts, no? Kasi direct evidence yun eh. Tama ba ako?
Yes, and sign yon. If they say, no, I'm not willing to release my SAL, and no, I'm not willing to sign a bank waiver, no, I'm not willing to give you my cell phone records, that indicates that they would want to hide something. Kasi kung wala ka naman tinatago, you would say, sure, go ahead, I'm innocent. Go ahead, look at all my records. Or if I'm part of a circle, okay, may kasalanan ako, pero sasabihin ko na yung katotohanan, kaya eto na.
Okay, so in this hearing, or in these hearings that you had participated in, what's the objective really to pin down these district engineers or to pin down the masterminds, which the public now seems to see quite clearly that it's really the Speaker and Zaldico at the very top, at least for now.
In a legislative inquiry, it's very hard to say what the overall objective is, because every single congressperson who asks a question has or may have their own agenda. Now, of course, the main theme of a legislative inquiry is always in aid of legislation. But in order to craft legislation, you have to know what happened. You have to know the truth. So part of that is really a search for finding out the truth based on the people who will testify.
Right. So parang so far, as the congressional hearings have gone, na parang ngayon nga nag-fizzle out, what are the chances that the real masterminds behind the flood control projects, let's just focus on the flood control projects for now, kasi yung mga iba na sinasabi mo na infra projects, no, ay wala pa eh, parang ngayon palang sumusulpot na ang dami pala nila at wala pang investigasyon. But let's just focus on the flood control. Right now, parang how close or far away are we from identifying and really pinning down the real masterminds?
Okay, let me make certain distinctions. First of all, when we say, for example, alam niya yan kasi speaker siya, that is not direct evidence. That's an inference we're making. If we're talking about criminal prosecutions, you need proof beyond reasonable doubt. So you need something more than simply that kind of inference. You have to establish, for example, that there was a money trail, that there were communications made between the co-conspirators, that there were instructions given na ito ang gagawin mo. Those indicate that they are part of the circle and that they're guilty. Right. So that's the first. The second is that you have to also look at it from two different angles. The criminal aspect is one, but we have forfeiture proceedings. Forfeiture are civil cases. You don't need proof beyond reasonable doubt. All you need to show is that this person, this government official has acquired ill-gotten wealth and therefore dapat ibalik niya sa gobyerno yon.
And that's the part the SALN plays, right?
That's where the SALN comes in. That's where the Solicitor General plays a crucial role. Because under the law, Republic Act 1379, when there's evidence of ill-gotten wealth, it's the Solgen who must file a petition. All they need to prove is preponderance of evidence, not reasonable doubt, and the court can already order that ill-gotten wealth be returned to the government. Sa tingin ko ngayon, at dahil lalong-lalo na ang daming nananawagan na magkaroon ng pananagutan, yan ang dapat unahin ng ating pamahalaan. Get that money back. The criminal cases will take time because you have to develop a lot of evidence. And then you have to be sure that if there are witnesses, hindi sila babaliktad. No? So, while we're developing and building up the criminal cases, dapat mauna na yung forfeiture.
Pero yung forfeiture, walang kulong kung walang direct evidence din of criminal liability, right?
Walang kulong yon, pero at least it's a step forward and we have something positive because if it's established, then the money is returned. We can all at least say, oh, at least man lang ay naibalik yung pera na ninakaw. That's one. And that is a good first step in terms of a criminal prosecution later.
Tapos the criminal proceedings will follow.
Yes.
So, for example, Zaldico, what are the chances na maibalik yung, well, sabihin na natin na 30% of the 42 billion supposedly na nawala dahil sa kanya. Sabihin na natin, again, it's all talk. Nothing in black and white as of yet. But mabawi yun. Madali lang ba yun? Kukunin lang natin yung ni Zaldi now that the Ombudsman has said dapat ilabas lahat ng salin, dapat lahat may karapatan humingi ng salin. How easy is that to do?
Well, okay, let's speak in the abstract, whether it's Zaldico or anybody else. The first thing you do is you get the SALN. Then you look at the SALN and you find out what are this person's legitimate sources of income. Saan siya kumikita? Sweldo, baka may iba pa siyang napagkakitaan dati. Okay, fine. Then you look at their lifestyle. You look at what they post on social media, and what their children post, where they have traveled, how much they have spent.
How many planes they have.
And yes, how many planes they have. And you compare. Based sa ganitong pinagkakakitaan nitong opisyal, kaya ba niyang mag-acquire ng ganyan klaseng wealth?
So obviously hindi, di ba?
Yeah.
So paano nga, how do the proceedings go?
No, it may not be as simple as that because there may be officials who will put their wealth in corporations which have supposedly a different legal personality.
Right.
So the next question is, can you pierce the corporate veil? Can you show that they just did that in order to hide their own personal wealth? Pantago lang, kumbaga. If you can establish that, then even that layer can be pierced and you can still have that those properties forfeited.
But that's also not easy to do.
It's not easy.
Corporate veils are not easy to pierce.
Let's just say that when you compare a criminal case with a civil forfeiture case, it's still easier to establish a civil forfeiture case than it is a criminal case because the standard of evidence is lower.
So let's kind of like put a realistic timeline to it. For example, if we're talking about, say, Congressman Zaldico, and we're just going after what he has allegedly stolen, mga gaano katagal bago natin ma-forfeit yun in favor of the government?
Tingin ko, ngayon pa lang dapat nagsisimula na yung prosesong yan.
Sino magsisimula?
Well, the Office of the Solicitor General is the one empowered by law to do this. Although any citizen can actually file a petition to require the Solgen to act.
Okay.
No. But let's assume that this is already being done by the government, then it shouldn't take that long because the government has resources that we don't have. They have access, for example, to the Anti-Money Laundering Council. They have access, through that, they can access bank accounts and other things. No? So these are matters that should already be moving now. Maybe they won't be able to gather everything, pero kahit ma-establish na may ilang billion o milyon na nakaw na pera, at least simulan doon at ibalik na yon.
So bakit hindi sinisimulan?
You have to ask the government about that. I'm not privy. I don't know if it's being done already or not.
But can't you as a congressman actually push for it?
Yes, provided we have the venue to find out. Yes.
At this point, parang ang feeling ng lahat, parang fizzle out na itong hearings, itong, initial fervor to get these crooks and to make them accountable. Parang nawala na and wala nang hearing, no? Senate Blue Ribbon, nawala na rin, tinapos na bigla. Tapos, hinand over na sa ombudsman na bagong appointee na so many people are also saying political appointee rin. And I have to ask you, no, na Kasi ang perception din ng tao, perception, ay ang punto ngayon, according nga to Amy Marcos, ay dapat mahuli ang mga Duterte na sila rin ay may sala. And I have to ask you this because even in your own line of questioning, parang laging bumabalik yung question sa kailan nagsimula. And laging bumabalik sa 2016. And kumbaga, parang nagiging basehan ito for saying na hindi lang naman sa panahon ni Bongbong Marcos nangyayari ito. Panahon pa ni Duterte, nag-umpisa pa nga ito. You know, in the case of the Discayas, di ba? So, I guess the perception of many, especially the pro-Duterte side is, nako, yung gobyerno, gustong nila ngayon ipihit talaga sa impeachment ni Sara Duterte. And that Ombudsman Remulla is actually there to make sure that this plan forges ahead. Anong thoughts mo dyan?
Well, para sa akin, accountability really should have no political color. Everyone who's responsible for stealing billions of pesos must be punished. And whether you begin with those involved apparently or what they allege to be involved in this administration, it shouldn't stop here. Everyone involved in the past who had any kind of criminal responsibility should be prosecuted. And if it comes out that all of these projects, all of these anomalies started in the previous administration, then dapat rin may pananagutan doon.
But the perception precisely is kayong mga yellows, kayong mga party list na nasa minority noon na ngayon nasa majority na, especially in the Senate, no? You're now in bed with the Marcos side because you have one common goal, and that's to impeach Sara Duterte or ruin her chances of ever winning in 2020. Your thoughts
I
on
have
that?
to disagree with that. We don't have a common goal with this administration. This administration's goal is entirely and purely political in character. Our goal is accountability. That's why we got involved in the impeachment. That's why we're investigating these issues of flood control, because we want accountability, and that's something that the people have been, aching for so long. And para sa akin, especially coming from my background, I understand that for accountability to happen, so many different parts of the system have to work properly. It's good that these issues have come out. Mabuti may nagsasalita. Lumabas na yung nakita mo, you saw all that money on the table and how from the budget process, doon pa pala nagsimula yung pagpaplano ng corruption. But it cannot end with an expose. It must end with people going to jail. And that's why, para sa akin, one of the unspoken parts of this call for accountability must be the courts. The courts must prioritize corruption cases. They must make sure that no corruption case can last ever for a decade or longer. To me, that is a crime in itself, where you will allow corruption cases to sleep in the court system. Hindi dapat mangyari yun.
Talk to me about how it has slept all of these decades, no? Na parang wala tayong nakita talaga na sawang-sawa na nga kami sa phrase na big fish, di ba? Parang no big fish in jail. Talagang mga butete lang, sabi nga ng mga iba.
I was really shocked during the budget hearings when the judiciary appeared before us and we were given a whole bunch of documents. And as I was looking over them, I saw a chart that showed that there are many cases still pending in the Sandigan Bayan. Trial pa lang ito, hindi pa ito appeal.
Oo.
That have been there, corruption and ill-gotten wealth cases that have been pending trial for decades. There are 10 cases that have been pending since 1987. That's 40 plus years.
Panahon pa ni Cory.
There are more than 200 cases that have been pending for more than 20 years. And I was shocked because para sa akin, yun ang unang dapat i-prioritize ng courts natin. No corruption or ill-gotten wealth case should last longer than 3 years in a trial and 2 years on appeal. That's my own opinion. And I hope that the courts will adopt that approach, because we're talking about the money of ordinary Filipinos here. And if there is no accountability for corruption cases, then how can we expect accountability for other crimes? Yun, hindi katanggap-tanggap yung nakita kong datos. And I do hope, recently I understand the presiding justice of the Sandigan Bayan announced that they would really fast-track these cases. I hope that will happen and it will become a reality.
60 days for a decision. Do you think that's feasible?
I've heard that a lot in my 36 years of practice. And I hope that we put a clear year limit for the whole process. Kasi yung problema pag 60 days and then sabihin nila may extension. Kasi ganito, may ganyan. Minsan ang nangyayari, it lasts even longer than a mere 60 days.
What do you mean? Paano magla-last longer? Anong pwedeng mangyari in a 60-day deadline?
Okay, the courts have always, our court has always had continuous trial system. That has been in place for decades already. The problem is that because we lack judges, for a long time we lack judges, hindi nakayanan ng sistema na i-implement yung continuous trial na matatapos, let's say, within 60 days yung isang kaso. Kulang talaga sa judges, kulang sa prosecutors yan. Now, but if we were to begin, let's say, with corruption cases, and we can track those cases in the Sandigan Bayan and the other lower courts, we can make sure that the justices are all appointed and sitting, then there's no excuse for cases to last that long. Now, when we say 60 days, lawyers are always, in my experience, are always going to find ways to extend that period.
Like what are those ways?
They'll say, may sakit yung witness namin, may ganitong problema, iakyat namin sa higher court yung issue na yan, yung ruling ninyo. Ang dami niyan. So that, for me, my opinion, rather than putting a 60-day limit, we say no trial of a corruption case should last longer than a certain number of years. 1 year, 2 years, max. No excuses. When that period is ended, the trial should be over. A decision should be made.
And in your proposal, 2 years?
Yeah. Para sa akin, a complicated case, not more than 3 years. A simple case, not more than a year. Trial period. The appeal shouldn't take more than 2 years, regardless of how complicated the issues are.
Paano pag nag-election tapos binoto ulit yung kung sino man yung nasasakdal? I mean, the politics always gets in the way. That's the problem.
Still, that shouldn't be an obstacle. For me, accountability is accountability. Whether even if you are elected again, if you committed a crime, especially a crime against the people, you should be punished.
Okay, so how is that proposal now being taken? Is that being considered? Because Justice Ekong is saying that, well, it's going to be 60 days. Ombudsman Remulla has also said the same thing, no? Parang they're just talking about days. They're not even talking about a year, no? Apparently, siguro, I don't know, maybe to soothe people's fears na wala nang mangyayari dito and siguro gusto nilang instant justice. So you're saying that this is going to be unrealistic?
Well, maybe I have to make my voice even louder to make sure that they listen. Let's see what will happen. It's beyond our control. I'm not in the judicial department, so let's see what the courts will do. Ang sense ko, they feel the clamor for quick and speedy accountability, without sacrificing, of course, due process and the rights of the accused. And I do hope that they will do everything they can to make that happen.
How do they do it in Singapore? Because, right now, ang dami lumalabas social media, how we compare with Singapore. Singapore, talagang, in a short period of time, talagang nananagot kung sino man ang dapat managot, no matter how high up. What are we doing wrong?
We don't have a system in place that rewards that kind of efficiency. In fact, I would say that our system rewards yung pagdiskarte at yung paghahanap ng butas para tumagal palalo yung case. justice to me should be either you're guilty or you're not guilty. But unfortunately in our country, there's a third option where the case is just sat on. And you're in a sort of limbo, but you're not convicted or you're not affirmed to be guilty. And therefore, that explains why we discovered all those cases that have been pending for more than 40 years. Hindi dapat nangyayari yun.
So the injustice is coming from the judicial or justice branch of government?
It's coming from the lack of a resolution to the case, which shouldn't be an option.
Which is also the purview of the judicial branch,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So ang mahina dito yung judicial branch.
When it comes to corruption cases, dapat unahin talaga ng judiciary yan, sa tingin ko ha. That should be the top priority, and there should be regular monitoring by the highest court. Ano nang nangyayari sa mga kasong yan? Bakit hindi pa yan nare-resolve? There must be pressure put as well on the lower courts to come up with decisions based on the evidence that will not take decades to be resolved.
Again, we all know that even the judiciary is politically captured. How do we solve that?
We have a big problem with the independence of the judiciary, especially with the experience that we had in the last administration, where even members of the courts were not exempt from tongue lashings by no less than the president, where even judges were included in the list of supposed narco personalities, even if there was no evidence that they were involved. Siyempre, nakaka-apekto sa independence ng isang judge yun. Matatakot siya. If I do something, might the highest executive official take advantage of the law and use the weapon of the law to go after me or my family? Kailangan mabago natin yan. Part of the problem actually comes from how we appoint our judges and justices. It's all concentrated on the president. Even if we have the
There's a judicial and bar council.
kahit na meron tayong JBC, in the end, yung nararamdaman natin, yung utang na loob, it's still to the appointing power. And to me, that culture has to change. If we want to have a really, truly independent judiciary, then either we change the system or we make sure that the president will not abuse that power and will clearly appoint people not because they will owe him or her something, but because they will decide cases on the merits.
Yeah. Kailan kaya magbabago? I was reading about your father. And napaka-saktong-sakto na nung binabasa ko, siya pala yung unang, not una, but he was the first one, the first Secretary of Justice to go after Harry Stonehill, and name no less than the President of the Philippines, si Macapagal at that time, as the recipient of the bribe, And as a result of which, tinanggal siya sa pwesto ni Macapagal, This was a huge corruption case, and ang kalaban niya mismo si President Macapagal. And he paid dearly for it because he lost his post. But thankfully, nagkaroon ng justice on Macapagal kasi natalo siya ni Ferdinand Marcos. We don't now know whether that was good or bad, but the point is your dad was very brave in doing what he did, even though he knew that he was running against the president. And that was like in the early 1960s. How little we have changed.
Yes, it's quite sad that we haven't established the strong institutions that we need to truly have accountability in the country. Part of that is because during martial law, the judiciary was really robbed of its independence. Marcos Sr. really issued very clear directives, decrees that that stripped the judiciary of its independence. For example, he said in the 73 Constitution, you can continue in office unless I decree otherwise. So, hawak niya sa leeg lahat ng mga judge. And we are still recovering actually from the loss of independence of the judiciary from that period of time.
But it's been like almost 40 years since the Cory Constitution took effect. How is it that we haven't corrected?
Yun sana yung purpose kaya nagtayo tayo ng Judicial and Bar Council. Unfortunately, it hasn't addressed that problem. To me, I think we have to look back and revisit that and come up with a different way of appointing members of the court, especially the Supreme Court. Sa tingin ko, it should be more of a council of different members of society rather than members of government who should choose our justices. I think that there should be representatives from the different sectors who must have a say in terms of who can sit in the Supreme Court. Because when you appoint a justice, you appoint the justice basically, well, not for life, but for until they reach the age of 70. And that length of time, if they're not independent, could really destroy our democracy rather than strengthen it.
Shouldn't we put a limit na to their term?
Tingin ko it's not the term that we have to put a limit on. It's more of how they can be appointed and how to remove, how to depoliticize the process so that wala silang utang na loob.
Kasi yung sectoral din, yung sectoral representation, napaso na rin ng mga tao dyan because of the party list, no? I mean, the party list as it is now, I don't think that was the original idea of the framers of the Constitution, di ba? Now, anybody can be represented by anybody, even if they're not a member of that sector. And as a result of which, napaka-powerful ng party list block sa Congress. So if we're going to leave it to the sectors again to decide it, parang even the credibility of the sectoral representatives or heads is already in question. In short, the public doubts practically everybody who makes any political decision.
Hindi naman nasira ang party list dahil sa genuine party list organizations. Nasira ang party list kasi may nakakita ng butas at talagang inexploit nila yon. One of the things that we're now working on is a party list reform bill that we hope will bring back the original intention of the party list so that sectors really are represented in Congress. Para sa akin, the reform must include at least three things. Number one, who can be accredited as a party list organization? Para sure tayo na sectoral talaga ang i-represent nila. Number two, who can sit as their nominees? And number three, pwede bang mag-political dynasty ang party list? Dapat hindi. There must be strict prohibitions on political dynasties becoming party list organizations or nominees of party list organizations.
So this will overturn the decision of the Supreme Court?
Definitely.
It doesn't need a constitutional amendment?
No, I don't think so. I think all we need is to reform, to amend the law.
But good luck on that because Congress is made up of so many vested interests.
That's true. But at the same time, what has happened recently with this expose on corruption also is a good sign in the sense that it's a sign to Congress that their authority, the people are concerned about the authority they've given to our legislators. And ultimately, that power belongs to the people. So if we can get the people behind us in pushing for a party list reform law, kahit sa ayaw at gusto ng mga mambabatas, they may have no choice but to support it.
Nako, I hope you're right. And what about the anti-dynasty law?
Darating din tayo dyan. You know, despite the feeling of depression that overcomes us from time to time, I am still optimistic, primarily because our population is changing. Even our voting population is changing. It's a very young voting population that has now the power to put in people, even if they're not celebrities, even if they're not known or have name recall. We've seen that in the last elections, and I hope that in the years to come, we'll see more and more of that.
Well, but let's hope that social media and the influencers there, especially on TikTok, ito yung talagang nasa masa. Let's hope that they don't get in the way, because there's just also so much, trolling and fake news, and now, the threat of AI, and people not knowing exactly what to believe, what's right and what's true and what's genuine or authentic. Diba, parang sa tingin mo ba, ma-overcome yan? Nung, sabihin na natin, nung youth na aware that you're talking about, yung youth na wiser that you're talking about?
I think so. And speaking of the space on social media, one thing I've learned in the last several years is that you have to fight for that space. The minute you surrender that to the trolls, to yung mga bayaran dyan, you're giving it up. And yet, I think my own example is proof that you can gain space, and you can use it as to leverage the truth on social media. It's a challenge. It's a creative challenge. You need to have very good team. You need to be willing to get out of your comfort zone. But to me, it's so important, whether you speak of the political landscape or even advocacies, the causes that we're pushing for.
Okay. Last question about your family and about your dad. The father of human rights, we know him to be. Do you feel the pressure to continue holding the torch or upholding the name?
I've felt that pressure ever since I became a lawyer and decided to be a human rights defender. I recall appearing early in my career before the judges in courts, and some of them would ask me, "Anak ka ba ni Senator Diokno?" And sometimes of course I would say yes. Sometimes I would get a better reception from them, but sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes they would even treat me more harshly. So it's something that I guess I've learned to carry. It is still there, sometimes at the back of my head, because now that I'm a legislator, people may compare me to my father as a legislator. But at the same time, para sa akin, what's important is I keep my eye on the goal, on getting the objectives that I set out to do. And for me, it's no different from my advocacy for human rights. Why is human rights important? To me, human rights is important because when you recognize human rights, you have to recognize accountability. And that's still the same thing I'm pursuing now as a legislator, accountability. Why is human rights important? Because when you recognize the human rights of a worker, an indigenous person, you're empowering that person. And empowerment in our country must be given back to the people. We've seen power concentrated too much in the hands of a few. Why is human rights important? Because it speaks of equality, na pantay-pantay tayong lahat. And as a legislator, that's also what I'm looking for, that we have equality in our laws and in the way that they're implemented.
But rights are also often equated with freedoms, and freedoms are very often abused. How do you draw the line?
It requires eternal vigilance. There will always be people who will abuse freedoms or try to stifle freedoms, but at the same time, we will have to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that we can still remain free and being able to express ourselves fully, especially when we speak of government excesses or abuses.
Thank you for watching. If you like what you just saw, please like and subscribe.